Have you ever gotten frustrated and tired from writing boilerplate code in AnyLogic? Have you ever wondered whether there might be an easier way to write standard code like getters and setters, constructors, etc., or maybe even not write them at all? Hi, I'm Jacob and welcome to the AnyLogic Modelers YouTube channel. Now today we're going to be looking at Project Lombok and the use thereof inside AnyLogic. Now although we might not be the first ones to blog about the use of Project Lombok inside AnyLogic, we'll be trying to show some of the features not discussed previously and also show you some of the better ways of how you can use it inside the standard AnyLogic UI features like the variables. So the easiest way to learn is to start with an example. So we start off with a very simple example. We've got our truck agent here. It's got a variable called fuel level, and we've set this variable in accordance with good object-oriented programming best practices. We've set the access level of this fuel level variable to private, so that we can control all access to this variable from within the truck agent in the way that we want to do it. So we've got a variable here, get fuel level, which will provide you the fuel level, enable for somebody else to make a change to this variable. And we also have a set fuel level where if you want to change it, we know exactly who will be calling this function. If you're unfamiliar with why putting variables private is a best practice, I suggest you do some reading, but this is definitely the way in which you build complex models, especially if you're working with other team members or know that somebody else will be working on your model in the future. So now that we can see for every variable that we've made private, we also need the two functions to get it and to set it. And maybe there's some more complications that we want to do when we're setting the variable. Now imagine we want 4, 5, 6 different variables. Then suddenly we'll have double the amount of functions that we'll have to copy and paste and do the same sort of action again and again for each one of them. So let's say we want to add a few variables to this model. We've got our engine temperature, we've got our last refuel date, and you have getters and setters for each of these. We'll have to duplicate that function variable, change the name, change the code inside of it, etc. So it seems like a lot of work. Now, what might have been covered in previous blog posts is how you can activate Project Lombok for AnyLogic. So one of the things that you'll need to do is to add the lombok.jar file to your AnyLogic project, but also you need to add it into your AnyLogic initial file. So that's been explained in the previous video by Philippe Harrow from Lojax. So I'm going to just show you how to do this on the Mac. So if you just go to where your AnyLogic application is stored on the Mac, by default it should be under Applications. You can right-click Show Package Contents. Then inside of the contents, you go to Mac OS. There you paste a lombok.jar, right, that you've downloaded from the Project Lombok website. And then inside the AnyLogic.ini file, you add in this this function called Java agent ;Java lombok.jar underneath the VM arguments section. Yeah, okay. It is discussed in the Stack Overflow issue as well. Okay. So once you've done this, you need to open up AnyLogic again, and then AnyLogic will recognize Project Lombok. So what was discussed in previous videos is how you can rather move these variables instead of the canvas to the additional Java class sections on your agent's code on the properties window. So here in additional class code, you can create your variables here. So double V, fuel level, whatever the case is, and you can create them here. But you don't need to do that if you add some custom modifiers to your variables. Now these custom modifiers, previously you had to go into the preferences of AnyLogic and activate under the development area the library developer mode, which now should be by default enabled on AnyLogic versions. And if you do that, you will see this custom modifier section. And now here we can add in @getter, @setter, which is standard Project Lombok annotations that we can add here. And then we can add this to all our variables. It automatically creates a getter and a setter for the variables for you. And we can actually remove or ignore these for now that we see here. If we go to main, where I've created a truck agent, and we've got a button here to just get those variables, you'll see how it automatically creates these getters and setters for us. Get fuel, get last refuel date, etc. So it's automatically being created for us, and we can also get the set function for each of these, where we can set the engine temperature, set the fuel level. So we've already saved ourselves a lot of time in creating these getters and setters. So just a note is that these getter and setter functionalities are also available on parameters, as you can see here in this example model. But normally parameters are not things that should be gotten or that should be set during the simulation run. In fact, it is of such importance that you actually use parameters only for the construction of your agents, for like creating new agents, and not change them during the simulation run, that AnyLogic provides you with this on-change code, where you can throw some error or do something if somebody changes this. So I normally create some error message when creating parameters, especially when working with bigger teams, where I have something like, please do not change this during mid-simulation run, to warn people that it should not be changed. But if you also add getters and setters, it will also work the same on the parameters, because they're technically just special variables inside AnyLogic. So this is all good, this is all great. If this is the only thing that you take away from this video, that's great. It will save you a lot of time. It will help you to use private variables, private connections for your models in the future, where a lot of the times, even when I'm building simple models, I would sacrifice good object-oriented principles for efficiency. In order to save time, I just make everything public, and more often than not, it comes back to bite me in the end. Okay, so for the advanced users, we want to talk about using Project Lombok inside your Java classes, where the benefits are a factor more. So if we have a look at this model, we want to add some trip records to our truck, right? And this trip record, we are not going to make a new agent inside AnyLogic, as that will just bloat our model in terms of memory use and CPU performance, etc. If you're more curious about why this is the case, I've got a separate video where the link is in the blog post. But we're going to create this trip details class, and you'll see I already started with trip details basic. And yeah, I've got my private double start time, the end time, the start location, the end location. AnyLogic already gave us this default constructor and the default toString file, right? So if we start with just this, it looks kind of simple. But in order for us to actually make use of this, we'll need to add a lot of things. We need to add getters for all our variables and setters, and maybe different types of constructors. And we're going to change our toString function, etc. So when we are done with this, it's going to be a lot more complex. Now in standard IDEs like Eclipse, for example, if we have a look at this, where I've created this class for me, you can right click, say source, generate getters and setters, generate toString, generate constructors using fields, and the IDE automatically creates this boilerplate code for you. So we can also go to some of our LLMs. So for example, I've got the AnyLogic ChatGPT object that I've created here for myself, and I'm telling it, please create a Java class called trip details with the following variables all private, create the partial and full constructors, as well as an insightful toString method. And it will create all of this boilerplate code for us. As you can see here, it makes them all private. It gives me a full constructor. It then gives me like a partial constructor with only start time and maybe string location, then one with only the end details. So it correctly guessed that you might want to create a trip with only start details or only end details, all the getters and setters, and some new toString methods. So this is all great, and we can copy this and we can paste it into our model. And it will look something like this when we are done, right? So here I've got a very nice usable trip details file. I just called this one no Lombok, because in the example that you'll download, this is the one where we do not use Project Lombok, and then the final one is where we do. So you can see here, this is a whole bunch of code. If we copy and pasted it from an LLM or some other IDE, it's great. It would have saved us some time, but it doesn't save us on the volume of code that exists inside our project, right? So how can we make life easier for us? So the first way that we will do this is, once you've activated Project Lombok in AnyLogic as well as in your project, is to now import it into your Java class. So the first thing that we will do now is we'll import Project Lombok. So if we just go import code complete, we choose Lombok, the package here. And if we start with just the getters and setters, we can immediately add them here, add getter, add setter for each one of our variables. Let me just fix this one. And this way we can immediately delete all the getters and setters that's been created for us, right? So we're already saving a lot of code that we've got here, and all the functionality is still exactly the same. Now the next step is to also add in here like all argument constructors, like we're saying, we want a constructor with all the arguments. So you can see that now this one becomes superfluous and we can delete it. And maybe we want a no arguments constructor for our model, where we want to create just an empty one. So you can see now this one becomes unnecessary, right? And here's a partial constructor. So since we've got an all arguments and a no arguments constructor, we can also do an all arguments required constructor. So required arguments constructors from Project Lombok. And now everything that is either tagged as @non-null, meaning that it's not allowed to be empty, or anything that we set to final, right? If something is final, then we must have it as part of our constructor. And now obviously we can't have a setter. So you are actually, by using these variables and these annotations, you get to build your code correctly because it warns you about the things that cannot be assigned. So we can remove all of this. And so once we've done this, we will now have an empty constructor, so the one that we normally have. We'll also have one with all our required arguments constructor. The next one we're going to talk about is the toString method. So if you do toString, it automatically creates a good string method for you. Here it's giving you a warning that you already have this functionality. So if we remove this one, we get a toString method that will give us the value of each one of the variables that's in our model. So see how simple this is. We've really removed all the code that was like boilerplate code. It doesn't help us at all, and we've added 3 or 4 arguments to our or annotations to our class. One can also combine all of these into a single one. As Philippe showed in his video, if you do add data, it gives you all of these arguments constructors, all arguments, no arguments, or the required arguments constructor, and all getters and setters for your application. So that's really nice. If you want to combine all of them, you can just do the add data class. Now there's also another way that you can use the same kind of methodology, and that's if you do records, which we'll talk about in a future video. The last one, which I also want to talk about, is the @builder. Now what is really cool about @builder is that it essentially allows you to write your constructor in a sequential way by calling the variable names. So I'll show you how this looks like. Okay, so if we go to main and we click on @trip_builder, you'll see that we're going to be creating a variable called trip details for trip 1, and we call trip details.builder. And if we do the .builder, then suddenly we can call .start time, .end time, .start location, .end location, .build, etc. And then we add a trip. So when you're done with the application, you just call, or your function call, you just call @build, and it essentially builds this object for you with all the arguments that you've given it. Okay. So let's say I didn't make use of the builder class. So I'm just going to comment out all of this, and let's put in our trip details here, which uses Project Lombok. Let's comment out the builder class, and let's just call the all arguments constructor. Okay, so let's do exactly the same thing, but this time we build our trip 1 using our new trip class. We're going to be calling our normal traditional constructor, so trip details class, trip details. So if we want to create this new trip details class using our traditional constructors, we can see here's one that's, for example, start location, end location, or we can use double start, end time, start location, end location. Okay, so let's use this one. We're saying it's 100.0, 200.0, and let's say we're going from Cape to Cairo, right? Okay. But when we look at this, or somebody else looks at this code, they do not know whether this is start time, end time, maybe the average speed of the trip. We've got no idea. Is this the start time, start location, eventual start location, final location, end location, midpoint? They've got no idea. Where if you use the builder constructor, you can actually automatically see exactly what you are setting up. Where here, I normally tend to go in other people's code and say, okay, well, what is all the constructors that we've got available here? So I would usually open up code complete again and try and see what it was that we set up, what could they possibly set up, and there might be multiple constructors, and I need to go through all of them and see which one that they use or not. and all of this goes away when using the builder class. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you are interested and want to learn more, please go and read the blog post or download the example from AnyLogic Cloud or from the post itself, and feel free to reach out if you've got any questions. Thank you so much.